Jack hadn't planned to overhear it. The conversation was just background noise, a pair of women chatting in the booth behind him at the local cafe while he waited for a man to pick up their order. He'd barely registered the words until he heard his son's name. No, not his son, not anymore. And she said she wasn't even sure Jack was the real father. The air in his lungs froze. The voice wasn't Amanda's, but it belonged to her coworker, Emily, someone he'd seen at their house more than once. He didn't turn around, didn't breathe, just listened as his reality cracked. The woman laughed nervously. She said it's probably Luke's, but Jack's so obsessed with being the perfect dad, he doesn't suspect a thing. Jack blinked slowly, swallowing the acid rising in his throat. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the ease with which they were spoken, like his life was a subplot in someone else's drama. Amanda returned moments later, her smile wide and perfect, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag of croissants. Ready to go, babe? Jack nodded, his voice gone. He took the coffee with a hand that suddenly didn't feel like his own. That night, after she fell asleep beside him, peaceful, warm, trusting, Jack sat in his home office, staring at the framed ultrasound photo on the shelf. He remembered the day Amanda had shown it to him, tears in her eyes, his chest filled with awe and joy. It was all. He ordered the DNA test the next morning. It arrived in a discreet envelope 3 days later. He took the samples while Amanda was out getting her nails done, swabbed the baby's mouth with trembling hands, sent it back, and told himself he was paranoid, that it was all just some cruel misunderstanding. But deep down, he already knew. 2 weeks later, the results confirmed what his gut had already screamed. The probability of paternity is 0%. Jack didn't cry. He didn't yell. He sat in silence for 2 hours, staring at the papers like they might rearrange themselves into a different truth. Then he picked up Amanda's phone. She always left it on the nightstand, too confident, too trusting. The passcode was still their anniversary. He scrolled through the messages, and there they were. Text from Luke, late night confessions. I miss you. He doesn't suspect anything, a video, a photo. By the time Jack set the phone down, he wasn't the same man. He wasn't the devoted husband anymore, not the proud father. He was something colder. Amanda had built her life on a performance, and Jack was going to make sure the curtain came down hard. He just needed the right moment, one where everyone would see, everyone would know. He thought about the church. The baby's christening was in 3 weeks. From the outside, Jack looked unchanged. He woke early, made coffee just the way Amanda liked it. Oat milk, a touch of cinnamon. He kissed her on the forehead before work, played with the baby after dinner, and smiled through the small talk with neighbors. No one noticed the subtle difference in his eyes, the way he no longer really looked at Amanda, but through her. She had no idea. In fact, she seemed almost smug lately. She'd been glowing more than usual, wearing lipstick for no reason, humming while folding laundry. There were even moments she looked at Jack with something like pity, as if she still believed he was the fool in all of this. But Jack wasn't blind anymore. He was watching her. Every move, every glance at her phone, every time she left the house and said she'd run errands, he documented it all, quietly, methodically, like he was preparing for court. In a way, he was justice. Or something darker. What haunted him most wasn't the betrayal itself, but how ordinary had felt for her, how easily Amanda had constructed a parallel life while lying next to him every night. That level of deception, Jack realized, wasn't spontaneous. It was practiced, intentional. Cruel. He started visiting the lab that handled the DNA tests. Not for any second guessing, he'd already burned those illusions, but to retrieve signed verification documents and surveillance footage proving he was the one who submitted the test. That was important. People might say he forged it. He needed undeniable proof, the kind that couldn't be spun by Amanda's tears or Luke's arrogance. Luke, Jack had seen him around town a few times lately. He was one of those men who wore wealth like armor, perfect teeth, custom suits, a gold watch that glinted under sunlight. Luke walked like the world owed him something and was just late delivering it. Jack had once respected him, admired his confidence, even considered him a friend. Now, every smirk, every casual nod from across the street made Jack's blood thrum with cold fire. They'd used him for comfort, for cover, for money. One night, after Amanda fell asleep with the baby monitor tucked under her arm, Jack unlocked her phone again. He'd become disturbingly good at this. It no longer felt like trespassing. It felt like justice. He transferred photos, recordings, even a voice memo Amanda had sent Luke. Once the christening is over, we'll figure it out. He's still useful right now. We just have to keep things smooth a little longer. Useful. Jack clenched the phone so tightly his knuckles paled. His ears buzzed with a quiet, trembling rage. Still, he put the phone back exactly where he found it. He had what he needed. At the church, he met with the pastor under the pretense of helping plan the ceremony. They discussed music, seating, lighting. Jack even suggested a microphone setup so everyone could hear the readings more clearly. I just want it to be perfect, he'd said with that same warm smile he wore like a second skin. He wondered if the pastor noticed how hollow his voice had become. That night, Jack stood by the nursery door watching Amanda rock the baby to sleep. She looked angelic in the dim light, humming softly, eyes heavy with peace. If he hadn't known the truth, he might have believed she was the perfect mother, but she wasn't singing to his son. She was singing to the living proof of her betrayal, and soon everyone would know. By the second week, Jack had stopped looking at Amanda like a woman he loved. Now, he watched her like a puzzle, not to solve, but to dismantle. Her schedule had become predictable. Tuesday morning Pilates, Thursday brunch with the girls, Saturday phone calls in hushed tones while pacing the back porch. The only wild card was Luke, who still kept his distance, careful to appear absent. But Jack had already tracked the pattern. He knew the model and plate number of Luke's car, knew the exact time he parked 2 streets away and walked through the alley behind their house, knew how Amanda would leave the side gate unlocked on nights Jack claimed to be working late. The affair wasn't just a secret. It was orchestrated, but that was fine. Jack wasn't planning on stopping them. He was documenting them. One by one, he gathered what he needed. He bought a hidden voice recorder and planted it beneath Amanda's vanity. He installed an old security camera in the garage, angled perfectly toward the side gate. He even synced Amanda's phone to his laptop using an app designed for parents monitoring teenagers. She had no idea. She thought she was the director of this play. But Jack had rewritten the script. One night, he listened to an audio file recorded earlier that afternoon. Amanda and Luke were in the living room. Jack had been out, but had only gone as far as the gas station at the corner. The recording was clear. Luke's voice, lower than usual, said, "He's not stupid, Amanda. He's just blind. But after the christening, you need to make a move. I'm not going to keep hiding like some dirty secret." Amanda had sighed. He still thinks this baby is his. Once we finalize the trust account, I'll handle it. Just let me do it my way. Trust out. Jack paused the playback. A sharp coldness spread through his chest. He opened his safe, the one Amanda rarely touched, and flipped through the folders. One was missing. He found it the next day, reinserted clumsily. Amanda had never been good at subtlety under pressure. Inside were drafts of legal documents. She'd been speaking to a lawyer, one Jack had introduced her 2 years ago. They were revising their son's financial trust, redirecting assets into a shared account under Amanda's name. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. They weren't just lying to him. They were actively draining him, slowly, silently. And Amanda had the audacity to hum lullabies in the dark. Jack didn't rage. He didn't scream or break things. He just sat at his desk that night, staring into nothing, his fingers steepled under his chin. He realized something simple. Amanda hadn't just cheated with Luke. She had chosen him. Carefully, calculatingly, Luke had status, charisma, and a lack of scruples. Jack, meanwhile, had been chosen for the opposite reasons: stability, loyalty, and predictability. Even the foundation, Luke was the fantasy. And now that the house was built, they were ready to tear the foundation down. But Jack wasn't ready to collapse. He was going to bring the whole thing down on them. 3 nights before the christening, Jack paid a visit to Father Dalton at the church. It was late after evening prayers. He brought a bottle of good scotch, a smile, and a request. "I'd like to give a short speech after the baptism," he said softly, staring at the cross above the altar. "A few words for family, for tradition." Father Dalton nodded slowly. "Of course, Jack, you've always been devoted." Jack raised his glass but said nothing. Devotion. Interesting word. The next day, he printed everything: DNA results, bank documents, screenshots of messages, timestamps, surveillance images. He assembled it into a folder so meticulously organized it could be mistaken for a legal portfolio. He tucked it into his briefcase. Then he sent a group message to Amanda's family, his parents, a few close friends. "Excited to see you all Sunday. I'll be saying a few words at the end of the ceremony, something important to me. Hope you'll be there." Amanda read the message and smiled. "You're giving a speech? That's sweet." Jack met her eyes. "It's long overdue." That night, as she curled up against him in bed, her head on his chest, Jack stared at the ceiling. Her breathing slowed into sleep. She smelled of lavender and wine and soft lies. She shifted slightly, one hand across his ribs. And still, he didn't move. Even now, some part of him remembered the way he once loved her, the way her laughter used to disarm him, the way they'd picked out paint colors for the nursery with stupid little arguments about sky blue versus robin's egg. But that version of Amanda was gone. Maybe she'd never existed. And the man she betrayed, he was gone too. All that was left now was justice. And 3 days from now, he would have it in public, with God and everyone watching. Sunday arrived cloaked in clear skies and hollow promises. The church bells tolled in the distance as Jack adjusted his tie in the mirror. The navy suit was freshly pressed. The cufflinks Amanda had gifted him last Christmas gleamed beneath the soft bedroom light. Funny, he remembered, how touched he'd been when she gave them to him, thinking they symbolized 24 months of stability and love. Now he saw them for what they truly were: decorations, tokens in a performance. Downstairs, Amanda was already fluttering between the baby's outfit and her makeup bag, moving with the focused energy of someone who needed the day to be perfect. The baby cried once, then quieted in her arms. She cooed, swayed slightly, and looked radiant in her pale blue dress. Radiant, unbothered, completely unaware that the floor beneath her was about to collapse. Jack smiled gently when she asked him to double check the gift bag for the godparents. He even kissed her cheek. He looked her in the eye. He didn't blink. On the way to the church, Amanda chatted endlessly about the floral arrangements, about her sister's arrival from Atlanta, about the priest's sermon last week. Jack nodded, murmured agreement, kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting over his phone. Inside his coat pocket, the flash drive pressed against his ribs like a heartbeat. Everything was on it: voice recordings, photos, bank logs, the entire timeline. But Jack wasn't going to rely on tech alone. The folder was printed, sealed, and tucked into the inner lining of the baby's christening bag. If anyone questioned the truth, he'd hand it over in silence, let the pages speak for him. As they pulled into the church parking lot, Amanda leaned over and squeezed his hand. Nervous, she asked. Jack offered a tight smile. A little. It's a big day. They walked into the church like a family from a magazine. Jack in his tailored suit, Amanda glowing beside him, their baby bundled in a white christening gown. Smiles followed them. Whispers of admiration floated in the air. Such a beautiful couple. They looked so happy. Jack made mental notes of every face in the pews: Amanda's parents, their friends, Luke's wife, even a few mutual coworkers from the office. The perfect audience. He spotted Luke near the back, standing alone, wearing a muted gray suit and a grin just subtle enough to be deniable. He nodded toward Jack in a gesture that suggested camaraderie. Jack returned it with a calm, unreadable expression. You'll be smirking soon. The ceremony began with hymns and incense. Amanda held the baby, swaying slightly to the rhythm of the music. Jack watched her fingers stroke the child's back, so gently, so lovingly. A practiced mother, a convincing liar. Father Dalton's voice filled the cathedral with warmth. He spoke of dedication, of cleansing, of truth and grace. Jack barely heard him. His thoughts moved like machinery behind his eyes, gears turning, memories aligning, rage held in tight fists inside his chest. Then came the blessing of the child. Amanda turned to Jack. You want to say a few words before the blessing? Jack nodded and stepped forward, his shoes echoing faintly against the stone floor as he approached the microphone. He stood before the altar, the cross towering behind him. The stained glass windows threw colors across his shoulders, like a man bathed in holy light. He cleared his throat. Thank you all for being here, he began, his voice strong, unwavering. Today is supposed to be a celebration, a moment of faith, family, and devotion. And for some of us, it still is. A pause. His eyes scanned the room. Amanda smiled nervously. Luke shifted in the back pew. Someone coughed. But before we go further, I think it's important to honor truth. Not just the truth we show on Sundays or in holiday photos, but the truth we live or hide when no one is watching. He reached into the baby bag and pulled out the folder. He held it up. For months, I've lived in silence. I've smiled through lies, eaten dinners with betrayal, held a child I believed was mine while being played for a fool. But not anymore. Gasps rippled through the congregation. This, he said, tapping the folder, is the truth. This is the DNA test proving I'm not the father of the child I've raised. He raised another paper. Are financial documents showing plans to transfer our assets behind my back. These are text messages between my wife and Luke, yes, that Luke, planning to leave me once they'd gotten what they needed. The room stilled. Amanda's face had gone sheep white. She took a step forward, hand trembling. Jack, don't. He turned to her. Don't? You've lied to everyone in this room. You've used my name, my money, my trust, but not anymore. Then, addressing the priest, Father, I apologize for bringing this into your house, but a blessing built on lies is no blessing at all. He set the folder down on the altar. I won't be a part of this performance. Jack stepped down, kissed his son softly on the forehead, because whatever else he was, the child was still innocent, and walked out of the church. Behind him, the room erupted. Amanda's sobs broke the silence. Luke rose to leave, only to be intercepted by Amanda's father, whose voice rang louder than any prayer had that morning. The truth had arrived, and Jack had given it a voice. But Jack didn't look back. He stepped into the sunlight like a man walking out of his own funeral. The church door slammed behind him, muffling the chaos inside. Amanda's cries, someone shouting Luke's name, gasps from friends and relatives. It all blurred into white noise. Outside, the air felt cleaner. Cooler. He breathed deeply for the first time in weeks without the weight of pretense pressing against his chest. Freedom didn't feel like victory. It felt like silence. He walked to his car and sat for a long while, staring at the wheel, his hands still trembling from the adrenaline. He wasn't sure what came next. There was no applause, no triumphant music, only the low thud of his heart adjusting to the void Amanda had left. But he had done it. He had ended the lie. By the time he returned home, the news had spread across the neighborhood like fire through dry grass. In a town where everyone knew each other and nothing stayed secret for long, Jack had just detonated a social bomb. Text messages pinged on his phone, some supportive, some stunned, a few hesitant, all laced with curiosity. He ignored them. He wasn't ready to tell the story again. Not today. Maybe not ever. Later that night, sitting at the kitchen table alone, Jack stared at the high chair Amanda insisted they buy because it was the one in all the parenting blogs. The baby wouldn't be returning, at least not with Amanda. And yet, Jack didn't hate the child. He hated what the child symbolized, the consequence of betrayal, an embodiment of everything stolen from him under the mask of family. And still, when he closed his eyes, he could hear the baby's laugh. That part wasn't a lie. His care had been real, even if everything else hadn't. The next day, Amanda's world began to unravel. Her social media was silent, the once curated gallery of filtered joy now frozen in time. Her parents, humiliated, stopped answering her calls. Friends whispered and drifted. The cozy social circles she'd once dominated began to evaporate. Luke's business partner withdrew a major contract, citing reputational risk. His wife filed for divorce by the end of the week, citing adultery. Amanda, unable to hide behind her carefully crafted image, was left exposed publicly, painfully. Jack didn't gloat. Yeah, he didn't need to. The truth had been enough. He stayed quiet in the weeks that followed, attending therapy, keeping his routine simple: coffee, work, long walks. Slowly, the fog lifted. Sometimes he woke up thinking Amanda was still beside him. Sometimes he wished she was. Not because he missed her, but because it would have made the loneliness easier to explain. One Friday evening, as he sat alone on the porch watching dusk bleed into night, the doorbell rang. It was Claire, a former colleague of Amanda's. They had spoken briefly at office parties, nothing more than friendly nods and passing comments, but that night, she looked different, unsure but warm. I heard what happened, she said softly. I just wanted to check on you. Jack hesitated, then nodded. Thanks. They sat for an hour, sipping tea in comfortable silence, words barely needed. She didn't pry, didn't ask for details. She simply listened when he spoke and smiled when he did. Before she left, she placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. You're not broken, she said. You're just beginning again. It wasn't much, but it was something. As the door closed behind her, Jack exhaled. For the first time since the betrayal, the silence didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like peace.